everyone. We wanted to give a content and trigger warning. In this episode, we'll be exploring themes of sexual assault, violence, and gore. Welcome to Lovecraft Country Bumpkin, y'all. We're your hosts, Klara,
Tori,
and LaTara.
We'll be here every week to chat about the show, its themes, its best moments, and anything else that gave us nightmares.
In this episode, Ruby learns that magic exists when William gives her a potion that transforms her into a white woman. This allows her to land her dream job at Marshall Fields and become embroiled in Christina's plan to take over the Chicago Lodge. The end of the episode reveals that William has been Christina all along, using the same potion she gave Ruby to turn into a man. So I think I speak for the entire council here when I say this episode was bananas.
It was crazy. It was crazy.
I finished watching it and I was like, and when the episode first started, I texted everyone. I was like, what is happening?
I felt like I needed to just go lay face down and either think about everything or nothing.
Preferably nothing.
Probably both, honestly.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just it's just a lot. And I think we were chatting before we started recording about how we felt about this episode, being particularly rich of things to talk about. Because it was in terms of the plot that was happening the episode, it started at a 10 and then kept going
and
just kept going at the same pace for episode. And then there was all these different bits of dialogue and different references as usual for the show, in which you could follow down a rabbit hole. But it was just it reared from the beginning and then just kept going to the end of the episode. Yeah. A lot to talk about.
Yeah, I don't love everything that happened obviously in this episode, and that's something we're going to get to in detail later on in our podcast, I'm sure. But I think this might have been my favorite episode so far.
It was definitely my favorite episode, I think. And I think I liked it because there were things that I did not like. I very distinctly
it was so disturbing.
It was so disturbing, but it was so well done. To Clara's point about how they just kept, they suspended us in this high level of discomfort, but also of investment. And I think that's not an easy thing to do. And so I loved this episode, even though I was deeply uncomfortable and unhappy with some of the things that happened.
Yeah. I think I was still processing. I really like last week's episode. But I think in terms of this episode is really this is kind of maybe trite to say, but really engaging. And working with a lot of different things and complexities, I think that in very smart and intentional and purposeful ways.
Yes.
Well, with all that in mind, why don't we go ahead and dive into our Bummy Awards? The Bummy Awards are the awards that we give to the most exciting, the most shocking, the most wonderful thing that happened in this episode.
Most thing that happened.
The most.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Who won this episode for you guys?
I can go first because I think my Bummy Award for who won the episode is probably the most obvious answer, which is Ruby.
Yeah. And
I don't know if one is exactly the word, right? I know we'll probably talk about some things that happen with Ruby's character later on in the episode, because she did some things that were disturbing, but she also did some things that were incredible. And I have always loved Ruby, loved her as a character. And I remember I said last week I was excited for the opportunity to see more of her and to get to know her better. And this was Ruby's episode.
Yeah, this was
we
Ruby's
got to know her.
We got
uninterrupted.
To know her. Ruby uninterrupted, 100%. And just like most people, when they're uninterrupted, there's some incredible things in there, and there's some ugly things in there, and there's some really hard to look at things in there. But I enjoyed every moment of it, even when I was deeply disturbed. But yeah, I think I know one of the themes we're talking about in this episode isn't necessarily not necessarily good versus evil, but sort of the line between distinctions, how nebulous that line really is. When we're thinking about yeah, perhaps good and evil, also like sanity and insanity, and like I'm sure we'll get into a lot of other sort of supposed dichotomies, but that are actually have quite a bit more in common than we think on the surface. And Ruby was that for me, and even just thinking about like, you know, Ruby, like white Ruby versus like black Ruby, like, and then the similar, like, even like that's a huge line that's blurred because they're the same human. So I don't know. It was yeah. No, Ruby, she got me
kicks all
together
your
this week.
binaries in the teeth.
Like,
Yeah.
all of them. She don't want them, and she don't need them. She's too incredible for them.
she's too she's too much of a human being for them. She's a
Mhm.
whole person. Yeah, I think like in terms of like when we're talking about this question of like good or evil, or like what it means to even have those kinds of distinctions between good and evil. I think the scene that like definitely that we're all kind of like skirting around is the scene where she is talking to the manager after they all have gone to the south side of Chicago, and she starts off as White Ruby and then transforms into Black Ruby in the midst of assaulting him and sexually assaulting him. And so part of the things that I want to, you know, kind of like talk about is how we even like approach this kinds of approach discussing this particular scene or these kinds of questions. Because I think it's unfair. I think it's cheap and like dishonest intellectually and emotionally to like just reduce things to a question, to be reductivist and to reduce things to a question of like, was she right to do this or was she wrong to do this? Because there's so much leading up to this particular scene that are historically important to contextualize, psychologically important to contextualize, and all these things. And so the question of how we read this scene, I think, like demands that we question to begin with, like what it means to, like why we even have these kind of dichotomies between good and bad and good and evil.
I 100% agree. And I think I think one of the things I loved about this episode was I think they purposefully sort of skirted that kind of like, or like I guess I like told the line in terms of like seeing how like contrived that line really is, and how like I love that you use the word like dishonest, because I think sometimes we like push ourselves, right, to like, you know, pick a hill and die on it. And
my favorite thing to do.
right. And oftentimes things aren't quite that simple. They genuinely aren't, and it does become quite reductive to just stop at the, was this okay? Was this not okay? Like, was this good? Was this bad? And it's like, perhaps the answer to all of those is yes, and then it's more interesting to talk about why you can't quite say it's all one thing and all the other, but it's both at the same time. So thinking about, because like I think Klara brought up two really important points, right? Contextualizing that scene in terms of like the show plot and contextualizing it historically. So I just wanted to like say like I wanted to ask you, like, could you like add some of that historical contextualization, Klara, that you were thinking of like when you said that?
Oh yeah, just kind of like the like when we say like, I mean, like I can't remember what the title of like last episode, but it was like a history of violence and how like violence like compounds itself and how trauma compounds itself. And so to interpret or to like try to make sense of like Ruby's actions is to like, you know, to contextualize it not in this one instance or like to her seeking revenge on this one particular individual, the manager, but to understand that her reactions, her actions and her intentions are steeped in her own personal like deep distrust and dissatisfaction and the horrible things that she's had to go through in her life. I'm like thinking again about you know what it means for Ruby to work at Marshall Field specifically in her own particular history, in terms of like trying to apply for this job, and taking back to our conversations last week about how she was talking about this kind of like rat race for Blackness and Black women to achieve social mobility and to navigate social stratification. So that's kind of what I was talking about.
Yeah, I think also we need to acknowledge she has like a sexual history with white men too, which she acknowledged in the past episode when William was approaching her. She was like, "Hey, well, you're not the first white boy to like promise me the world or like offer to make me a kept woman." Like, she she's familiar with the very fraught politics of, you know, sexual relationships, like the one he is seeking with Tamara. It's not a consensual sexual relationship. It's not like wanted. It's not invited in any way. There's implications that even like that's why she got the job at Marshall Fields. Like, I think that seems to be something also that Ruby has strong feelings towards and a like significant history with thinking about.
Yeah, and just like to continue, like to tie back to kind of like tie this knot of like what it means to like historically contextualize these things. Like Ruby's like to understand like the historical continuities. I'm like trying to give a better word, but like the historical fact that of Black women being assaulted or raped or sexually assaulted by white men going back hundreds and hundreds of years, and how this is how we can understand Ruby's actions and her understanding of this history to contextualize her actions and her intentions.
Yeah, I think like one like so sort of to like piggyback off what both of you guys have said. Like I think the episode does like, you know, kind of set it up such that like Ruby sees him assault Tamara in the alley behind like that bar or whatever. But the part like it was so chilling to me was when like, you know, Tamara like he like, you know, yells at her, like Tamara like bites him, runs away. He like yells at her. And then he like yells the N-word at her actually. And the B word. He was awful. So he like he
really
like says he says like these horrible things to this girl, and then the way you saw him straighten up and put on a smile, like adjust his mask of like gentility so that he could go back out into public. And I was like, that is some like sociopathic foolishness. Like that's terrible, right?
And it's special,
it's
like
terrifying.
Your word mask, I think, has special currency when we're talking about this one episode where you have people literally changing their skin. Like
yeah.
And then
so
he does it without magic at all.
Right? And the thing that got me, because we were talking about like the lead up to when Ruby is like shoving the heel of her shoe into his ass, right? And it's like that whole like the idea of the consensual power exchange, meaning that I feel like it has been implied multiple times throughout the show that white men have sort of an unchecked amount of social power, where spaces are not off limit to them, jobs, money are not off limit to them, and also women's bodies, Black women's bodies, are not off limit to them. And so then you have this, like for me, like when I was thinking about like in terms of historically contextualizing it, in terms of Black women and the violence that Black women have experienced at the hands of white men. This white man, right, purposefully like gave up his physical power in terms of allowing himself to be tied up and like have this belt around his neck to like a white woman for sexual pleasure. So I mean, he's still kind of the one in control, right? He's like, I'm allowing this to happen to me so that I can get off. And then Ruby completely upends that. And so like that move from consensual to non-consensual, but also that exchange of power in that move, who really like gets to have the say. And I think pulling out those different lines of power and exchange of power and consent and non-consent, that's not an easy task to do, because like they all not even intersect, but they all like overlay, like they layer on top of each other in ways that I think makes it really difficult to tease out and to pull apart. Like, so there was a part of me, which as a Black woman was like, I'm so glad she like got this man all messed up. And then there's another part of me that's like, no, like
that's not it.
You're still like sexually assaulting someone. I'm not entirely sure I can reconcile those two impulses, and quite frankly, I don't think I'm supposed to.
Yeah.
And so I think when analyzing the scene, there has to be a certain willingness to be uncomfortable with whatever conclusions you come up with, if any.
Going back to our conversation of what it means to ask what is right and wrong, I think the point of justice is a really great way to kind of convalesce this kind of question.
Yeah.
What does justice mean? What does justice look like?
Yep.
How do we and once we figure out those questions, how do we do justice?
And especially because the answer to that last one, how do we do justice? Almost always, everyone has different answers to that. Like, one person's version of justice, like, I doubt will always be identical to someone else's version of justice, which then of course brings us back to, well, what is justice then? If it's such a like a mini, like a changing thing, such a subjective thing. And I think it's not supposed to be in theory, but I don't know if it really isn't. I don't
have an answer for you, LaTara.
Me either, girl. Me either. I think I know I said this to you guys earlier when we were talking, but I think the best discussions, sometimes you end up with more questions than you do answers, or a multitude of answers from which you just can't pick the right one, because perhaps that right one doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
Well, we have only gotten through one of the three
oh my goodness.
winners of the episode. But I do think I'm glad
as
we dedicated
LaTara
the time.
said, this is Ruby's episode.
It's Ruby. She took it, man.
It's Ruby's episode, and I think that scene in particular is like an effective center from which all of the rest of the action should be read.
I agree.
So I'm glad that we devoted the time to this and talked about it really thoroughly, and I hope we'll continue thinking about this scene in its relation to all the others. Personally, my winner of the episode was William/Christina.
Yeah,
man.
For a lot of the same reasons that LaTara picked Ruby, I think. This figure, which we talked about in the last episode, how they were splitting the difference between Caleb and how they
pulled a fast one on Torre, is what I'm saying.
I did not see it coming at all. I was shocked. I was delighted, to be honest, because it was such masterful, like, craftsmanship. It was just great writing.
Yeah, it was.
I think it raises a lot of the same issues that Ruby's characterization here raised, like with consent, because we have Ruby in this, like, possibly romantic, at least sexual relationship with this person who is actually a woman, and we don't know if Ruby would have been fine with that if she'd have known that there was a woman inside of this male body, or if, like, she'd have known. Honestly, I don't even know how to talk about this. Like, it's very convoluted. And two, there's the question of how she got William's body. Like, was she William the whole time? Like, has William never really existed? At least as far as we know. Did she kill William? Was he killed in the fire that destroyed the mansion in episode 2? Like, there's just so many questions raised by this character, and I have no answers at all.
Yeah. Obviously questions about what does it mean, like, what does gender mean? What does gender mean to be constituted this way? What does embodiment of gender mean? And for them to spring that at the very end, to bring it, for them to, like, I don't know, I think, like, it's interesting in terms of, like, to think about, in terms of just, like, adaptation between TV and, like, movie, a TV and book, like, what does it mean for them to, like, split TV and movie? to split the difference between, split the character of Caleb in the book into Christine and William, as far at this point into the TV show, and then for them to, like, front the question of gender and embodiment, embodying the gender in this way, and, like, in terms of, like, magical, metamorphosis questions.
Yeah.
Metamorphical, I don't know if that's a word, but it is now.
We don't roll with it.
It's so related to William's embodiment. Like, William's body was chosen ostensibly, unless Christina was lying, she could have been lying. But, like, because this is the heir to the Chicago Lodge, right? And Christina needs a male body. She needs to be male in order to take over
to play the game,
achieve a place in the Sons of Adam. Yeah, exactly. But, like, I just like to point out, ain't nobody make her have sex with Ruby. She did that for fun.
She did. She wanted it. I don't blame her. Ruby is bad AF, but
nobody made her pick Ruby up at work
at all. And, like, I think So like, because like there was like something you like mentioned earlier, Tori, in terms of like how would Ruby feel about like having had
Mm-hmm.
sex with William, knowing that like William was like really Christina, but then like the question of like what does that really mean, right? An embodiment of gender, like if the body, I don't know, whatever. But like thinking about like questions of consent is like another one of those like
Mm-hmm.
fraught places, I think,
Mm-hmm.
that this episode asks us to
Mhm.
sit in discomfort and like ask not easy to answer questions. That was my first thing I thought. I was like, oh, I wonder how Ruby feels about having had sex with William now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I don't know, and like and she maybe she won't care at all. I have no idea.
Mhm.
But I think I think that's definitely for me sort of that negotiation of gender and embodiment, and also like sexuality, both in terms of like orientation, but also just in terms of like actual like sexual desire and like
Mm-hmm.
wanting to like connect physically with another person. Um, and then like the question of like consent and like what someone wants to like happen to them or wants to like actively be involved in. And then also for me, I have wondered this question of attraction. Sorry, this is a
Mhm.
lot, but I'm thinking question of attraction in regards to it's not specifically in terms of gender, but there is. I think it's going to sort of tinkling in the back of my mind. I wondering why Christina picked Ruby. And like perhaps it was like, yeah, like Ruby's bad AF. And I would be like, but like we all know that's not the only reason Christina picked her. Right? Like it definitely wasn't
It's
just because she wanted to
because
hook up with Ruby.
she felt magic for the first time when there was no magic.
Or like, because like they both have that seekingness,
Yeah.
like they're both
Oh,
like
interesting.
wanting to step
Yeah.
into spaces that they had traditionally been not
Mm-hmm.
been allowed to step into. If anyone can understand intrinsically what Christina feels in terms of being excluded from the Sons of Adam, it's Ruby.
Who's excluded from Marshall Fields,
Yeah.
And
for
like
example.
I was like, yeah, like Marshall Fields as like a construct for like all of white America, like
Yeah.
right, like all and like all of the benefits of it that she doesn't get to experience. And it's like even thinking about like attraction, it's like attraction and like gender, like that wasn't the only reason, you feel me,
Mm,
that Christina picked Ruby. Like it
Mhm.
wasn't just because like Ruby was a woman. It was because on some level I think she feels like her and Ruby are the same.
mm,
And I think too that's related. Like
mm,
Ruby's definitely participating in that because there's that scene where William, air quotes, unsure of what to call this person now, but he like goes to pick her up at work, right, and goes in to kiss her, and she's like, no, like gives him the cheek instead,
Mm-hmm.
and he like realizes you don't want me to kiss you as Hillary, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's like 4 people in this relationship, and
mm.
like
You're so right.
there's 4 people in this relationship and none of them are sure what to do with the other. Like even Ruby and William, which if you cut it down to basics, like that was the first like pairing, I guess, that happened, like the consensual pairing that happened. They weren't sure about it either. Like Ruby at least had some like
Yeah,
strong
right.
hesitations about what was going on there.
Yeah.
It's very convoluted, and this is why I picked William/Christina as my episode winner for today. I thought it was convoluted and fascinating even before you realized it was Christina.
Yeah, yeah. That sex scene they had was still pretty hot. I'm not even
And
gonna
I
hold
kind
you
of
up.
ship it. Like I still kind of ship it, and I don't know what to
Yeah.
do with that feeling.
So I'll be really honest. Like even when they revealed that, like when they revealed William was Christina, I watched these episodes with my roommate, and I looked at my roommate. I was like, I low key still want Christina and Ruby to hook up. Like I'm still really kind of down for this. Like, I
We
kind of want
ship
them.
it.
I still ship it. Like I kind of want them to hash it out and her be like, "Why did you pretend to be a whole other human and like give me this potion and what?" Because like Christina's sneaky. Okay, someone needs to call her out on all her plots and make her be honest. And I feel like Ruby is able to do that.
Mhm.
And so I feel like they need
Which
to
is like
like hash it
demanding who's in
out.
the basement.
Yes, yes. Well, like,
Mm.
like what are you doing? And they should talk about it and then they should hook up.
Why don't you write this show, LaTara?
Give LaTara writing credit.
Please, honestly, like they don't even know. I would have them together so quick.
I do want to say that I'm not to pop anyone's bubble, but this is me being like cynical. I'm like wondering if like Christina picked Ruby because of her proximity to Letty, and then therefore her proximity to Atticus.
And the pages, the missing pages.
Yeah, and just the whole crew and stuff.
So Klara hates romance.
I hate love. Ruby has only ever been excluded from Marshall Fields, and that's it.
Like, real talk though, I would still accept that. I feel like Christina is one of those characters who her plotting is a multi-level event. She could have picked Ruby for 5 different reasons at one time and meant all of them. Like, they all like mattered. Like, maybe she was attracted to Ruby and she thought Ruby would be a great accomplice because they have similar like struggles, and she also like wanted to be in close proximity to Letty and those like pages. Christina has enough mental space, you feel me, to handle all of that at one time. Plus,
she is a conniver.
Yeah, she really is,
and she's good at it.
She connives.
Okay, and she's complex.
Yeah, I think the Christina as a villain, it's, you know, again, asking our questions about good and evil, but as a antagonist, at least, is to pop up my literary terms. Antagonists are not always the bad guys, and protagonists are not always the good guys. But in terms of the antagonist, really compelling, very interesting character. Just very, very, very interesting, very cool.
All right, Claire, you're the last one. So who is your winner today?
The winner of the episode for me is not as interesting. I'm just kidding. I just like spotted some drag queens from RuPaul's Drag Race in the drag race scenes, and I was like, yes! I saw Shangela. It was fantastic. I think I saw Monet Exchange, but these are all in passing. I think I'm pretty sure I saw her. I love you. But yeah, I was just like, yay.
Yes, I think that was a really interesting scene. Did anyone have that for their standout scene?
I did. So I think it was like this. Yeah. Oh my God, it was so beautiful.
It was beautiful. Yeah.
I think it was like having an emotional day in general, but like in the scene where they're in the actual show, I'm kind of like for some reason separating in my mind between like the getting ready scene. We had different getting ready scenes, you know. In this episode, we had the getting ready for the drag show scene, and then we had the getting ready for all the white men to go to the Southside Chicago because that's what they want to do for shitty reasons. But I'm like separating in my mind between like the getting ready for the drag show scene and the actual show, and the way that they did that scene in which there was very, very, very little talking, if not any at all. I could be wrong. I think was just really beautiful and stunning, and the music that they did and the kind of sound design for this episode was so stunning. I think the color palette was beautiful. All the red. It was such a sumptuous, very like sensual scene to watch. It was so beautiful.
Absolutely.
I love drag. And in terms of like Montrose's centrality in this scene, I think is like really compelling. And, you know, we were giving him a hard time last episode because he deserved to be having a hard time too. He's not an innocent person. He earned it. Yeah, he did. But he's like clearly a very tortured person in which everything is weighing on him all the time. Some of it's his own fault, but there's just so much on Montrose all the time, and there's so much gravity to Montrose. And in this one scene, he's literally lifted, you know, he's literally lifted off the ground. And there was this kind of like levity and emotional like freeness that I found in the scene to be very, just really gorgeous. I cried all the time. And to like continue to flesh out these characters, to continue to flesh out Sammy, as well, I think, who had been short shrifted so far, and to have him be more fully developed in these short scenes was worthwhile to me.
You were just mentioning how like everything seems to be really heavy for Montrose. He just seems to be a character who has like a really hard time liking things, enjoying things. Like we've had like from day one him taking something Tick enjoyed, you know, his reading material, and then poking holes in it, you know, and he's criticizing everything that Atticus does and like unable to enjoy the like single family relationship that he has left.
Mm.
And here it was just the first time that I felt that he had loved something, like that he was free.
Mm.
That was the first kiss that he and Sammy ever had. And it was very like spellbound scene for me.
Yeah. I think like it was like sort of two things. Like one, going back to our questioning of dichotomies and of like the true limit between good and evil. How like last episode, like Montrose, he earned all the foolishness because he was a very foolish person and he definitely earned it. Book burning and murder. But this, like, it was so strange because in this episode, like I kind of had a moment with my roommate where we were like, we don't want to feel bad for Montrose, but like at the end of the day, people are people, by which I mean that sometimes they can do terrible things and also have another part of themselves that is not terrible, and that is a truth that is hard. That's hard to deal with and it's hard to process, and it's hard to like watch Montrose like kill someone and then also see him in this episode and realize like he has all these other issues and traumas, and he was being reminded again that he was abused, and like on top of that he also is gay and like and has to like have that hidden for lots of reasons, given his where he is like in time, like we're in the 50s and like he's black and on the south side and he has a son and like all this other stuff. And something about that was one thing, thinking about like our questioning of boundaries, but also like what you just said, Tori, in terms of like him being free. Like one of the like things about this scene that I think touched me was like I remember thinking clear as day, this is a place where healing can happen. Like when he was with Sammy and their friends, like getting ready beforehand, like it makes me think of like when you're going out, like when I go out with like my girlfriends and like we're all at someone's house getting ready and we're like pre-gaming and we're like playing music and we're like chatting and we're gassing each other up, like, girl, you look amazing, like go on and text that boy back, like he should be grateful you even responded to him,
that you grace his presence.
Absolutely. But the thing is, like, that's healing, right? Like that's sort of like being surrounded by like that affirmation and like that space to be free, to be whatever you are and to be totally accepted in that moment exactly as you are. That's rare and it's incredible. And I think the question I have, like after I had that, this is a space that could be healing. The next question I had was, but will Montrose let that heal him? And I don't know. Like, I think that's something maybe they'll come back to later. But given this particular character's traumas, his decision-making capabilities, where he just makes stuff worse, I don't know. But it was. I agree. It was visually beautiful. It was emotionally beautiful, I think, and it was kind of hard to deal with given all the stuff that Montrose did last episode. Like everything else, it was complex. Everything else in this episode, but it was a beautiful scene, Klara.
Yeah, good choice. My scene is probably pretty predictable based on my standout character, but my favorite scene was just the one where it was revealed that William and Christina were the same person. Like I said, blindsided me, completely did not see it coming, even though maybe I should have, but it was...
I can't see anything coming in this show.
Yeah. It was the crowning piece to a wonderful episode for me. And it caused all of these complicated questions that we've already discussed. But yeah, we can go ahead and move on since we already talked about all those things quite a bit. But LaTara, what about you?
This is a standout scene, right?
Yeah.
So for me, my standout scene, it was so small, it was tiny, but it was after like Atticus like went crazy and like tried to kill his dad, and then like Letty like had to get guys from the burning house pull him off, and then they go down to the basement and he's still like and like this like completely like sort of crazy, like I feel like he sort of like lost his thinking about sanity and insanity, this was a scene where I felt like Atticus was not himself. Like he actually
Mm.
kind of had a mental break and was a little bit insane, such that I was not sure what he would and would not do anymore because it did not feel like he was still Atticus. And where Letty came down to confront him, and he was like questioning her about where the if she took pictures of the pages from the Book of Adam, and she would not, like, she like stood her ground in front of him even though he was being all like loud and like violent. I was glad she did, because I think that was the moment that made him realize he was completely out of line and he had to come back to himself. And I was grateful he did not cross the line of actually hitting her, because I don't think I ever would have seen him the same if he did. But the part I loved was when they panned back on the camera and you saw that Letty had been holding a baseball bat. And the reason I loved it is because even though you know that she cares about Atticus, she respects him. Like, they've been through hell and back together. And even with that, she's still Letitia. Sorry, effing Lewis. And she was not going to let that man, like, having realized that she was afraid of him, she was going to take protection with her when she confronted him. Now, I want to like be clear. I do not at all like think, like, I don't want to like victim blame, and like people deal with abuse in different ways. And I definitely don't want to say like that like because she brought a bat with her that it made her like better than women who may not have brought a bat with them to that sort of situation where their partner is scaring them. Because that's a hard thing. I've never been in that situation. I've been blessed enough to never be in it. And I don't ever want to judge people who have different reactions to like that moment of I'm afraid of what my partner will do. But I did really love the fact that Letty took that baseball bat with her, and she was like, as much as I love you, if I'm afraid that you're going to hurt me, I'm going to make sure I can hurt you back. And especially because, you know, I mean, he's a vet, he's bigger than her, like, he's mad, he done beat the mess out of his own dad. And so I just had even more, I don't know, like that made me like love Letty even a little bit more, to be like, to realize in that moment, like as she confronted him, like even though she was scared, she was like, I'm still gonna make sure that I get you together if I have to. And thankfully Atticus came back to himself enough that she didn't have to.
I think, wow, we're on such a roll. This segues into my cross country award. So, the cross country award is the award that we give to the theme from Lovecraft country that's still most relevant in our country. And what I chose for today was like parental relationships and that like cycle of violence that can result from it. Because I too was really struck by Atticus in this episode and how terrifying he was. And how the people around him, his father, his girlfriend, lover, Letty, she's not safe either. Like, she felt like she had to take a baseball bat. And, you know, there are folks out there, there may be listeners like who are hearing this that come from really violent backgrounds. And, like, it's really hard labor to dig yourself out of those habits and out of those like just worldviews. And Atticus even said like, it's so like, I never thought that anger could be in me, and here we like see the proof that it really is. So I was really interested to see that side of Atticus as well, which I feel like we've seen glimpses of before, especially when he's confronting Montrose. But this was the strongest flare up, or like the most visceral reaction that we've seen so far. And that was really striking. I don't have like a nice bow to tie this up with, but like, yeah, it's hard labor, hard emotional, mental, spiritual work. And like, yeah, respect to Atticus, I guess, for doing that.
Yeah. Like, we know trauma compounds generationally. And I think that's like being, very clearly directed at that idea is being directed through the relationship between Atticus and Montrose, and between Letty and her mother. We hear like glimpses of that as well, but that's also seeding through. My cross country award, I think it's a little bit, I'm cheating a little bit and like drawing on ideas like from the 20th century. So I just wanted to read like a short passage from W.B. Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folk, and it's from the Forethought. So here's the first words. And so he writes, "Herein lie buried many things which, if read with patience, may show the strange meaning of being Black here in the dawning of the 20th century. This meaning is not without interest to you, gentle reader, for the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line." And I'm quoting this because Ruby mentions at one point, I can't quite remember to who, that she's been on both sides of the color line enough to know what like white women are thinking.
To Christina.
To Christina, yeah. To Christina to know what white women are thinking and what they are disillusioned with is themselves, I think is the line.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting. And so kind of, and I think like many people have asked if the problem of the 20th century being the color line has continued into the 21st century, if the problem of the 21st century will continue to be the color line. I'm not going to here to offer an answer to that because I think it's a very complicated question. What does it mean for race in the 20th century, and what does it mean for race in the 21st century? But in terms of our show for Lovecraft Country, there's ideas of passing in terms of like what like Ruby specifically when she's putting on like the skin of a white person, and she's literally passing in spaces that would have before been off limits to her or very fraught for her, and she's like, again, like I think like very maybe to like taking the idea of racial passing to its most extreme, and like being a white woman or having the skin of a white woman, when she is I don't know. I don't want to say like normally Black. Like, what does that mean? But to take that materiality of skin color and the materiality of like Black skin and the materiality of white skin and the materiality of racialized skin to its most extreme, in terms of like having a skin suit. And so I think this also feeds into questions, to borrow another term from Du Bois, of double consciousness. And what it means to have a consciousness of yourself, and to know that other people view you a different way, and then to be passing in this way, to view yourself as others would see you, while also knowing that you are, to also have a consciousness of yourself. I've often said that double consciousness should be recast as triple consciousness, and this just kind of like really takes it to this kind of makes me feel a little more validated.
I think my cross country award is the scene where Ruby is White Ruby and is and it's like wandering down the street like just completely out of it, which is fair given what she
just woke up white.
She woke up white. Like, it's totally fair that she'd be so stressed right now.
I think I'd lose my mind if I woke up white tomorrow.
I would just be like, you know what? I'm just gonna go back to sleep. This like clearly something went awry. I'm just gonna pray and go back to sleep.
I wake up white every morning.
Tori is my standout for this episode. Oh my god, that was so funny. So my cross country winner is the scene where like White Ruby is wandering down the street because Ruby woke up in a white woman's body, and she is freaking out, and that Black kid with the popcorn like approaches to help, and the cops see him talking to her, and the cops swoop in and are like, you know, like, stop bothering her, and like knock him to the ground, and about to like beat him with like the little, I mean, what's that thing called? It's like a mini bat.
Club.
A
Billy Club.
Something.
The Billy Club. Okay, I was definitely going to call it a mini bat. I knew that was wrong, but that was the best. That was. I
think it's the same thing.
It really is. But and then Ruby had to step in and be like, "No, he's not bothering me. He actually tried to help me." And you could see, for me, the part that got me was the long pause before she stepped in. Like it took her that long to calculate like what her power was in that moment, and that she could actually step in to save him. And so one of the things that made me kind of like think about that is, of course, like the show's constantly bringing back references to police brutality, given like how live that is in our current social dialogue, political dialogue. But also, it made me think of going back to the idea of surveillance of like witnesses and like how like now you have cameras that capture police brutality, and it's almost like how people now didn't believe it was happening until they saw videos. Like those cops couldn't believe that this black kid was not doing anything until this white
popcorn
stepped in to tell them, and so just thinking about witnessing and thinking about of course race and power and who's allowed to like have the say about when like the police are overreacting versus when they're actually doing their jobs. And so that scene brought me back to a lot of the questions that I had in relation to today's world as well.
Well, we're about towards the end of the show, but I did want to take a moment to think about the most obvious callback to our horror tropes from this episode, which I believe, like the title leads us towards. This episode is titled Strange Case, which is obviously a reference to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I think this might be like a good bow to put on a lot of the like thoughts that we've been having about good and evil and like binaries, because that book is clearly concerned with separating the good and the bad and how that ultimately fails. The whole premise of this story is this doctor inventing a concoction to kind of like liberate his sinful self so he can go out there and do all the nasty things he wants to do, but without like tainting his, more respectable, upright self. And here, I think it's really fascinating the take they took on this, because you really have like White Ruby and Black Ruby like collaborating. Ruby really like takes responsibility, I think, for her like white self. In a really interesting way. Like for example, in the scene that we've discussed at such length, when she's assaulting the manager, that's like a joint effort between her white self and her black self. Like her white self enables that revenge for her black self, like, but she wants to carry it out like with her own hands. Like, I want you to know who did this to you. She says, I won't use her exact terminology because it's offensive, but like it's fascinating, I think, the turn that this took, and just the way that, like, we have analyzed and, like, argued that they rejected these binaries, but, like, this moment where she explicitly rejects the Jekyll and Hyde kind of paradigm was really striking to me.
I think you're right. That was a good bow for this episode. Our interrogation of boundaries and dichotomies and even selves, like selfhood, embodiment. This is a good episode. Like the show, I mean, like there was a lot here to pull out. And we didn't even talk about how awful the transformation scenes were. Yeah, I had to throw that out there because that was wild.
It has to be acknowledged.
So nasty.
I like thought I got used to it, and then like I was not. Like it would come back again, and I'm like, nope, just kidding, not cool with it.
Nope.
It was like the scene where like Ruby is sloughing off.
Yes.
It's just like
it's like falling. Like,
the way it like splats everywhere. With
always when her face like falls off too, like with the skin face. That part always like.
And the William one where she like climbed out of his back.
Oh, that was crazy. You could see her hands
and her hair like coming out of his skin. Like
it was awful. That was awful. I'm sorry I brought it up. Actually, I did it to start trouble, and then I got way more trouble than I wanted because this was awful. Sorry.
Well, I think that's all from us today. So, if you enjoyed today's podcast, or if you hated it because we talked so much about the gross skin transformations, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave some comments for us, because this really helps us grow our community and bring the joy of Lovecraft Country Bumpkin to a wider audience. So,
Thanks for listening, y'all. And remember, white people have got shit going on you can't even imagine in creepy, crawly Lovecraft country. Bye.